I stood in the county assessor's office on a Tuesday morning in late June 2019, watching Dale Pritchard lean back in his chair with that look men give you when they've already decided you don't know what you're doing. He had my grandfather's property file open on his desk, 83 acres in Harney County, Oregon, most of it classified as wetland, which is a polite way of saying swamp. "Miss Carver," he said, tapping his pen against the folder, "your grandfather knew this land. You're 19 years old, and you've been here, 3 months? The county's offering a fair buyout for a conservation easement. You could walk away with enough to start over somewhere that actually grows something." I didn't answer right away. Through his window, I could see the Cascade foothills, brown and dry, even though we were barely into summer. The drought was in its 4th year. Everyone's wells were dropping. The hayfields around town looked like straw by May. "I'm not selling," I said. He sighed like I'd just told him I believed in fairies. "Sweetheart, that property's been underwater half the year since your great-grandfather bought it in 1947. It's got no road access worth mentioning. The house is falling apart, and you're running. 6 goats and some chickens? Be realistic." I picked up my copy of the file and left. The truth was, he wasn't wrong about most of it. The house was a 1940s farmhouse with a roof that leaked in 3 places. The land was wet, springs feeding into shallow ponds, cattails thick as walls, willow groves, mud that swallowed your boots in April. My grandfather, Thomas Carver, had died in March. I'd inherited the place because I was the only one left. My mother had been gone since I was 7. No siblings, no aunts or uncles who wanted anything to do with 83 acres of swamp 2 hours from anywhere. But I'd spent every summer here as a kid, and I remembered things the county assessor didn't. I remembered my grandfather walking the property lines with a notebook, writing down water levels, bird counts, the dates when the ponds filled and drained. I remembered him saying the land wasn't broken. It was just doing what it was built to do. The day I moved in for good, I found that notebook in the kitchen drawer under a stack of feed store receipts. His handwriting, small and careful, going back 30 years. Page after page of observations. Rainfall, soil moisture. The way water moved across the property in different seasons. And on the last page he'd written, dated January 2019, 2 months before he died. "They'll call it useless. Let them." I kept that notebook on the kitchen table for the first 3 months, read it every morning with my coffee, trying to see what he'd seen. The neighbors didn't wait long to start offering advice. Dale Hutchins from the feed co-op in Creswell stopped by the second week of April with a business card for a land broker in Eugene. Said he knew a developer looking for parcels near the national forest boundary, even marginal ones. Marginal. That's the word he used, standing in my driveway with his truck still running. I thanked him and said I wasn't selling. He looked at me the way you look at a child who's announced they're going to be an astronaut. Said to call him when I changed my mind. The property sat in a bowl between 2 ridges, fed by 3 seasonal creeks that converged in the center and drained south through a culvert under Swenson Road. In a wet year, the whole middle section turned into a shallow lake from March through June. My grandfather had dug 2 ponds in the 1990s, deep enough to hold water year-round, and planted willows and red osier dogwood along the banks. By the time I inherited it, those ponds were surrounded by cattails 8 feet tall and thick enough you couldn't see through them. The county had cited him twice for standing water and mosquito breeding habitat. He'd paid the fines and kept the ponds exactly as they were. I spent April and May walking the property with his notebook, matching his notes to what I could see. He'd marked every seep, every low spot, every place the ground stayed wet past July. He documented which trees grew where, which birds nested in which months, where the deer trails crossed. It wasn't random. He'd been managing the water, not fighting it. The ponds weren't accidents. They were overflow storage. The willows weren't decoration. They were filtration. The whole place was a system, and he'd spent 30 years learning how it worked. By June, the water had mostly drained off, and I could walk the whole property without boots. That's when I found the fire breaks, old ones, overgrown but still visible if you knew what you were looking for. Cleared strips running east to west across the northern boundary, connecting the ponds to the creek drainage. He'd cut them in the early 2000s, according to the notebook. Maintained them every few years. The county had never asked him to. He'd just done it. I spent the rest of June clearing those fire breaks back out. 3 strips, each about 20 feet wide and running maybe 400 yards from the pond chain to where Buckley Creek cuts through the northeast corner. The brush had grown in thick. Blackberry canes, young alder, some scrubby pine that had seeded itself in the gaps. I borrowed Dale Murchison's brush hog for the worst of it, traded him 24 eggs a week for the month. The rest I did by hand with Grandpa's steel, 026, the one with his initials burned into the handle guard, ERH, Edward Robert Harwick. That saw was older than me by 15 years and still ran cleaner than anything at the Tractor Supply in Ridgemont. Nobody asked what I was doing. That's the thing about being 19 on a swamp farm. People don't ask because they assume you don't know. Mrs. Callahan saw me dragging brush one afternoon and hollered from her fence line, asked if I was finally clearing to sell. I just waved and kept working. Let them think what they want. The notebook had a whole section on fire. Pages 47 through 63, written between 2001 and 2008. He'd studied the biscuit fire down in southern Oregon, the way it jumped containment lines where the land was dry and continuous. He'd noted wind patterns for our valley, prevailing southwest in summer, shifting hard to east-northeast when high pressure built over the Cascades. He'd drawn arrows on his property map showing how fire would move if it came from the BLM land to the north. The fire breaks weren't random either. They were perpendicular to that northeast wind. The ponds sat upwind of the house and barn. The willows and cottonwoods along the water held moisture in their canopy, even in August. He'd planted them on purpose, every single one. I finished the 3rd fire break on July 9th, stood at the north fence, looking back toward the house, and could see the logic of it. Water, green canopy, cleared ground, more water, then the buildings. Like a series of doors that fire would have to open one at a time, each one wetter than the last. That same week, the county posted its first red flag warning of the season, earlier than usual. The Okanogan complex had already burned 60,000 acres to the northeast, and the smoke was drifting our direction in thin gray sheets that made the sun look copper-colored by 4 in the afternoon. I watched the news at night on the old Zenith in the kitchen, the one Grandpa had kept because it got better AM reception than anything digital. The fires were still 40 miles out. Nobody in Harwick or Ridgemont seemed worried yet. The feed store was running its usual July sale on salt blocks. The diner still had its Wednesday pie special. Life moved at its regular pace. But I started filling the ponds, all 3 of them. The creek was low but still running, and Grandpa had installed a gravity-fed diversion pipe back in 2004, 6-inch PVC buried 18 inches down. running from a small rock dam upstream to the first pond. I'd found the shutoff valve in April, hidden under a flat basalt slab near the creek bank. Took me 20 minutes with a pipe wrench to get it open. The water came slow at first, brown with sediment, then cleared to that cold green color that meant it was pulling from deep in the channel. By Thursday, the first pond was half full, maybe 18 inches deep across the whole quarter-acre basin. The second pond, the one closest to the barn, took longer because the channel splits at a Y junction Grandpa welded from old irrigation fittings. I had to dig out about 6 inches of compacted clay from the inlet before it would flow. Got my hands raw doing it, didn't care. The third pond, the big one, the one everyone in Ridgemont called Morse's Swamp because it never fully dried, that one was already holding water from the spring runoff. Cattails thick as my wrist around the edges. Red-winged blackbirds nesting in there like it was a nature preserve. I just opened the secondary feed line to top it off, keep the water level at the overflow notch Grandpa had cut into the concrete spillway. People noticed. Dale Weston drove his truck past on Friday morning, slowed down near the east fence, and I could see him looking at the ponds through his side window. He didn't stop. But that afternoon, his wife Carol called me. Said Dale thought I was wasting creek water during a dry spell, and did I know the county had voluntary conservation guidelines in effect. I told her I was within my riparian rights. Grandpa's diversion permit was filed in 1987 and renewed in 2004, and I had the paperwork in the filing cabinet in the mudroom. She went quiet for a second, then said, "Well, Dale just thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up. Saturday I drove into Ridgemont for diesel, 16 gallons at $4.38 a gallon, $70.08. I filled both 5-gallon jerry cans too. The cashier at the co-op, Marcus Lehane, asked me what I was running that needed so much fuel in July. I told him the pump on the north irrigation line and the backup generator. He raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything else. Rang me up. I bought 4 cases of bottled water, 2 bags of dog food for Hetty, and a 50-foot roll of 1/4-inch sprinkler line that was on clearance for $11. The smoke wasn't visible yet from town. You could smell it if you stood outside at dawn. That faint chemical sweetness that doesn't belong to wood smoke from a fireplace. It smelled industrial. Wrong. The AM station said the Caldwell Ridge fire had burned another 6,000 acres overnight and was now 32 miles from the Harwick County line. Winds out of the southeast at 12 to 15 miles per hour. Humidity 9%. 9%. I remember repeating that number to Hetty while I drove home, like she'd understand. She was in the passenger seat with her nose out the window, ears flapping. 9% humidity means everything is tinder. Means a single ember can travel a mile on a gust and land in dry grass, and you've got a new ignition point before anyone even sees it. Grandpa wrote about that in his April 2003 notebook. The entry about the Barlow Creek fire that came within 4 miles of the property line. He wrote, "Fire doesn't walk, it flies." 3 words underlined twice in pencil. I started clearing the brush line along the south fence that evening. Cut back everything within 15 feet of the fence posts using the old STIHL chainsaw. The MS-25. Orange housing scratched to bare metal in places, chain sharpened so many times the teeth were half their original size. Still cut clean. I worked until the light was gone, stacking slash in the middle of the gravel pad where nothing could catch. By Thursday, I'd cleared a 60-foot fire break along the entire south boundary. 412 feet of fence line, bare dirt and gravel where 2 days before there'd been scrub oak and dead manzanita piled waist high. My shoulders ached in a way that felt permanent. That deep bone tiredness that doesn't leave after one night's sleep. But I kept going, moved to the east side next, where the property borders the Hendricks parcel. That's where the cattails grow thick along the irrigation ditch, and cattails in single-digit humidity are basically wicks. I cut them back to the waterline with a machete, filled 3 wheelbarrow loads, dumped them on the gravel pad with the rest. Friday morning, October 11th, I drove the Ford into town for diesel and saw the smoke column for the first time. Southwest, maybe 15 miles out, rising in a pale gray pillar that leaned northeast with the wind. By the time I reached the Tractor Supply on Route 9, people were standing in the parking lot just watching it. Dale Murchison was there, leaning against his Dodge with his arms crossed, and he said the fire had started near Piney Gulch the night before. Lightning strike on a dead ponderosa, already burned through 200 acres of BLM land, and was moving at what the Forest Service estimated was 3 miles per hour. Doesn't sound fast until you do the math on how many hours are in a night. I bought 4 extra 5-gallon jugs and filled them with water from the spigot behind the store. Loaded them in the truck bed next to the diesel cans. Drove home doing 50 on the gravel because something in my chest was telling me to move. The goats were restless when I got back. Pepper standing at the fence with her ears forward, not eating, just staring south. Animals know. They always know before we do. I spent that afternoon soaking the roof of the barn with the garden hose. Ran it for 2 hours straight, watching the water sheet off the corrugated metal and pool in the dirt below. Then I soaked the chicken coop roof, the woodshed, the north wall of the house where the old cedar siding is driest. Grandma's rain barrels, all 6 of them, the ones she'd installed back in 2007, were full from the September storms. 1,200 gallons total. I connected the hand pump to the largest barrel and tested the flow. Steady stream, maybe 2 gallons a minute. Not much against a wildfire, but not nothing either. That night, the sky turned orange at the horizon. Not sunset orange, darker, angrier, with a brown haze sitting above it like a bruise. The wind shifted twice between 8 and midnight. I sat on the porch with my phone open to the county emergency page, refreshing every 10 minutes. The fire had grown to 900 acres, still 15 miles out, still moving northeast, toward town, toward the Hendricks place, toward me. I didn't sleep. I sat in Grandpa's chair with his 2003 notebook open on my lap, reading his entries about the Barlow Creek fire by flashlight. He'd written detailed notes, wind speed estimates, ember distance observations, which structures survived and why. The houses that burned had wooden roofs and dry brush within 10 feet of the walls. The houses that survived had metal roofs, cleared perimeters, and water. Grandpa had underlined that word 3 times. Water. Not just for firefighting, for soaking the ground, the walls, the roof, for creating a zone where embers couldn't catch. I looked out at my swamp, at the irrigation lines I'd spent 2 months laying, at the wet soil that never fully dried, even in August, at the cattails and sedges that stayed green when everything else turned brown. And I understood what I had. By dawn on Thursday, August 17th, the fire was 11 miles out, and the evacuation order came through for Zone 3, which included my property. The sheriff's deputy, a man named Ron Castillo, drove up my road at 6:15 in the morning with his lights on. I was already outside, boots laced, hair tied back, standing next to the pump house with a wrench in my hand. He rolled down his window. "Miss Harlow, you need to pack essentials and head into town. Shelter's open at the high school." "I'm staying," I said. He looked at me like I'd just told him I planned to fly. "Ma'am, this is a mandatory evacuation. The fire's moving fast. We can't guarantee—" "I know you can't guarantee anything," I said, "but I've got water, I've got cleared land, and I've got a system that might actually help." He got out of the truck, looked around, looked at the wet fields, the irrigation lines, the metal roof on the barn, the stone foundation of the house, looked back at me. "You really think you can hold this?" "I think I can try," I said. "And I think if I don't, the Hendricks place is next in line, and they've got wooden siding and a cedar shake roof." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled a card from his pocket and wrote a number on the back. "That's my direct line. You call me every 2 hours. If I don't hear from you, I'm sending someone up here to drag you out. Understood?" "Understood." He left. I got to work. I soaked the house first. Roof, walls, porch, every surface I could reach with the hose. Then the barn. Then I opened every irrigation valve and flooded the fields until the ground was soft enough that my boots sank 2 inches with every step. I moved the chickens into the stone root cellar. I filled every bucket, every trough, every container I owned. I dragged the ladder to the roof and set up a sprinkler I'd rigged from PVC pipe and a garden hose, anchored it to the chimney, and let it run. By noon, the smoke was thick enough to taste. By 2 o'clock, I could see flames on the ridgeline. I called Harlan at 2:15. "I can see the fire," I said. "It's on the ridge above Dawson's old timber lot." "How fast is it moving?" "Fast. Wind's pushing it southeast." There was a pause. "That's toward town," he said. "I know. Get out of there, Ellie." "Not yet," I said. "The swamp is between me and the ridge. If the fire hits that wet ground, it's going to slow down. Maybe stop." "You don't know that." "My grandmother knew it," I said. "She wrote about it. The fire of 1974. It hit this same marsh and died. The peat holds water like a sponge, even in August. She planned for this. The irrigation channels, the way the fields sloped toward the low ground. It wasn't just for crops. It was a fire break." He was quiet for a long time. 2 hours, he said. "You call me in 2 hours, or I'm coming up there myself." I hung up and climbed to the roof. From there I could see the whole picture. The ridge burning orange and black, the smoke rolling like fog down the slope, and below it, my 14 acres of saturated marshland, the channels running full, the cattails standing in 6 inches of water. Beyond my property, the land sloped down another 1.5 miles to Route 9, and beyond Route 9, the first houses of Keeler's Crossing. The wind shifted at 3. I felt it before I saw the change. The smoke leaned east, then swirled, then pushed hard to the south. The fire followed. It came down off the ridge faster than I expected, eating through dry pine and scrub oak, throwing embers ahead of itself like seeds. I watched one land in the field west of my fence line. Colton Briggs's hayfield, cut and baled, but not yet hauled. It caught in seconds. The whole field went up in under 10 minutes, bales burning like lanterns in a row. But when the fire reached my north boundary, it met the marsh. I could hear the hiss from the roof, that sound of something hot meeting something wet, steam rising in white columns that mixed with the smoke and turned it pale. The flames crawled into the cattails and found standing water. They pushed a few feet, found more water, pushed again, found mud. The irrigation channels I'd opened that morning were doing exactly what Grandma Nettie's notebook said they would, spreading water laterally across the lowest ground, turning 14 acres into something the fire couldn't cross. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a wall of water meeting a wall of flame. It was slow and messy and full of smoke. The fire tried to flank east and hit the creek. It tried to push through the center and hit the flooded rice beds I'd planted in May on Nettie's recommendation. Beds that everyone at the co-op had said were a waste of time in Western Oregon. The rice was standing in 4 inches of water. The fire reached it and had nowhere to go. I called Harlan at 4:20. "It's holding," I said. My voice was raw from the smoke. "The marsh is holding." He didn't say anything for a long time. I could hear his scanner in the background, the dispatcher calling units to the eastern perimeter, where the fire had jumped Cutter Road near the Bevins property. Then he said, "Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm sending someone to check on you." I told him I wasn't going anywhere. I had nowhere to go. This was it. The farm, the marsh, the flooded ground beneath my boots. This was the only place I'd ever chosen to stand. By 5:15, the wind shifted northwest. I felt it before I understood what it meant. The smoke that had been pushing toward me suddenly thinned, pulled sideways, and I could see the eastern tree line for the first time in hours. The Douglas firs along Polk Creek were black skeletons from the canopy down, but the fire had moved past them. It was running north now, away from the marsh, away from town, pushing into the logged section of BLM land, where there was nothing but stumps and bracken and gravel roads that would act as fire breaks. I sat down on the levee. My legs just gave out. I sat in the mud with my phone in my hand and watched the smoke column lean north like a drunk man walking away from a fight he'd lost. The Kubota was still running behind me, the pump still cycling water from the deep well into channels that no longer needed it. I didn't turn it off. I couldn't make myself move yet. At 5:42, a Tillamook County fire engine came down Marsh Road. Engine 7, the one usually stationed at the NetArt substation. 2 firefighters got out and just stood there looking at the property. One of them, a woman about 30, soot on her face. Name tag said, Reeves. Walked to the edge of the flooded rice beds and stared at them for a full minute. Then she looked at me sitting on the levee and said, "Did you do this?" I nodded. She said, "This is why it stopped." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded again. The other firefighter was on his radio. I heard him say something about a natural fire break, then correct himself. Constructed fire break, irrigation system. It's flooded, maybe 12, 14 acres. He looked at me. How many acres? I held up my hands, fingers spread. 14, I said. He repeated it into the radio. Reeves came and sat next to me on the levee. She smelled like char and diesel and sweat. She said, "The fire was headed straight for downtown Garibaldi, 300 structures. If it hadn't stopped here," she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I knew what was behind me. I knew what the marsh had held back. My phone buzzed. A text from Dale Morrow. "Heard the fire turned. You okay out there?" I typed back, "Fine, farm's fine." I didn't say anything else. I didn't have the energy to explain what had happened, and I wasn't sure yet that I understood it myself. The notebook was in my kitchen, open to page 43, where Grandma Nettie had written in her careful, slanted hand. The marsh is not wasted land. The marsh is the land that saves everything behind it. I sat on that levee until the sun came up. Not because I was keeping watch anymore, The fire was done, the wind had died, the marsh had won, but because my legs wouldn't carry me, and I didn't trust myself to drive the four-wheeler back across the soft ground in the dark. Around 5:15, the sky turned that pale gray blue that comes before real dawn, and I could see the damage clearly for the first time. To the east, toward the Tillamook County line, the hillside was black. Not brown, not scorched. Black, like someone had taken a blowtorch to velvet. The Douglas firs that had lined Harker Ridge for 60 years were gone. Just spines, just vertical charcoal. But the marsh, my marsh, Grandma Nettie's marsh, the 41 acres Dale Morrow had called a liability and the county assessor had valued at $900 per acre, was green. Singed at the eastern edge, yes. Some of the cattails had burned down to the waterline. But the water was still there, black and still and cold, and the fire had reached it and simply stopped, like a dog hitting the end of its chain. I walked back to the house around 6. The chickens were furious. I was 2 hours late with feed. The goats were pressed against the far fence, still nervous, their eyes too wide. I fed everyone on autopilot: grain, hay, water check, egg collection, 11 eggs. I cracked 2 into a skillet and ate them standing at the counter, looking at the notebook still open on the table. Page 43. I read the whole entry again. Nettie had written it in March of 1987, after the county sent her a letter suggesting she drain the lower acreage for productive agricultural use. She'd written back, I found the carbon copy tucked between pages 44 and 45, a single paragraph declining the suggestion. No explanation, no argument, just, I will not be draining the marsh. Thank you for your interest in my property. That was Nettie. She never explained herself to people who hadn't earned the explanation. By 9 that morning, the road was open again, and trucks started coming down Marsh Creek Road. First, the utility crews, Portland General Electric, had lost poles on the ridge. Then the insurance adjusters, 3 of them in a white sedan that bottomed out twice on my gravel. They weren't coming to see me. They were headed to the Petersons' place, 2 miles east, where the barn had burned. But they slowed down when they passed my property line, and I saw one of them point at the green marsh and then at the black ridge behind it. I imagined the conversation. I imagined the math they were doing in their heads. Around noon, Reeves came back. She was in a clean uniform now, her hair pulled back, a clipboard under her arm. She brought a woman I hadn't met, Karen Ostrowski, from the Oregon Department of Forestry. They wanted to walk the marsh edge. They wanted to measure the fire line. I said fine, but stay on the levee path because the ground gets soft past the second culvert, and I wasn't pulling a state truck out of the mud today. Ostrowski laughed. Reeves didn't. Reeves had seen what almost happened. They walked the perimeter for an hour. I didn't go with them. I had fencing to check on the north side where the heat might have warped the wire, and I had animals that needed normalcy more than I needed to hear whatever official language they were going to use to describe what my grandmother had known 40 years ago. When they came back, Ostrowski asked if she could take soil samples. I said yes. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at a regional land management conference in Bend in October. I said I'd think about it. Reeves asked if I had copies of my grandmother's water maps. I told her they were in a binder in the house, pencil on graph paper, dated 1983 through 1997, and she could photograph them if she wanted, but they weren't leaving the property. She nodded. She understood that. They left around 3. I went back to the fence line. The wire had held, but 2 posts were charred halfway through and would need replacing before winter. I added them to the list in my head, a list that never got shorter, only rearranged by urgency. That evening, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea and looked out over the marsh. The light was gold and low, the kind that makes every reed look like it's been dipped in honey. The air still smelled like smoke, but faintly now, like a memory instead of a threat. I could hear the frogs starting up again. They'd gone silent during the fire. Now they were back, tentative at first, then louder, then relentless the way they always were in August. I thought about my grandmother, about the way she used to stand in this exact spot, one hand on the porch rail, the other holding a cigarette she never actually smoked, just let burn down between her fingers while she watched the water. She never explained what she was doing out here. She just did it. And when people asked why she didn't drain the marsh, why she didn't sell, why she kept fighting the county over wetland designations and easements, she'd say, "Because it's mine, and I know what it does." I didn't understand that when I was younger. I thought she was just stubborn. Now I know she was right in a way that doesn't fit on a zoning map or a tax assessment. She was right in the way that only shows up when everything else fails. The next morning I got a call from Bill Hooper. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. He asked if I'd be willing to let the county use my property as a fire break reference site for future planning. I said yes, as long as they didn't expect me to mow it or manage it any differently than I already was. He said that was the point. He said they'd send someone out in September to do a full survey and that there might be grant money available for wetland restoration if I was interested. I told him I'd look at the paperwork. I hung up and went back outside. The marsh was still there. The town was still there. And I was still here, 20 years old, running a farm nobody thought I could handle, on land nobody thought was worth keeping. I stood at the edge of the marsh that afternoon, September 3rd, 2023, and watched a great blue heron lift off from the cattails like it had somewhere important to be. The smoke was gone. The sky was that deep blue you only get after the air's been scrubbed clean by disaster. Funny how that works. In the weeks that followed, things shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Darla Hutchins brought me a pie, blackberry from her own brambles that survived because they were on the north side of her property, closest to my wetland. She didn't say much, just handed it over and said her grandmother used to make the same recipe. That was enough. Roy Pemberton stopped his truck one morning while I was checking the fence line along County Road 9, rolled down his window and sat there a minute before he said anything. Then he asked if I'd be willing to talk to his nephew about drainage management. His nephew had just bought 40 acres east of town and wanted to do things differently. I said sure, send him by on a Saturday. The survey team came out on September 19th. 3 people from the county extension office with clipboards and soil probes and a drone. They flew over the whole property. They mapped the water flow, the vegetation density, the soil composition in the buffer zones Grandma Nettie had maintained for decades. One of them, a woman named Dr. Patricia Okafor from the State University, told me that what I had here was essentially a textbook example of passive wildfire mitigation through wetland preservation. She said most people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to engineer what my grandmother had simply refused to destroy. I thought about that for a long time. Grandma Nettie hadn't been an engineer. She hadn't read papers about fire ecology or attended conferences. She'd just watched the land for 60 years and listened to what it told her. She kept the wet places wet. She let the cattails grow. She didn't drain what didn't need draining. And when everyone called it a swamp and told her she was wasting good acreage, she just kept doing what she was doing. I'm 20 years old. I run 147 acres in Blackwood County, Oregon. I have 23 goats, a flock of chickens I've lost count of, and a marsh that saved a town. I'm not special. I just didn't listen when they told me to give up on what was already working. If you're out there and someone's telling you that what you have isn't worth keeping, that it's too wet, too wild, too small, too strange, maybe take a second look before you believe them. Sometimes the thing everyone wants you to get rid of is the thing that holds everything together. If you've got a story like that, leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to hear more, subscribe. I'll be here. Same land, same mud on my boots, same heron in the cattails. I'm not going anywhere.